day one of the 2025 edition of Unstoppable Africa by the Global Africa Business Initiative, coinciding with the opening of High-Level Week at UNGA80, has drawn powerful voices and urgent themes into sharp focus: conflict, sustainable development, and Africa's expanding role on the world stage. And as Arise international correspondent Adefemi Akinsanya reports, the top voice at the United Nations has thrown its support behind greater African inclusion.
True to its name, Unstoppable Africa is just that, a continuous stream of potential, prowess, and power, delivered by the Global Africa Business Initiative, the first of its two-day event brought together leaders of nations, businesses, and organizations, all of them determined to see Africa succeed.
The optimistic note is that the opportunities now in front of the continent worldwide. Businesses are trying to diversify their value chains. And Africa is one of the areas we are pointing. You can diversify here.
Africa's leaders have made forceful appeals for peace, for climate justice, and for an end to conflicts that stretch beyond borders. Having a conversation about Africa at Unstoppable Africa, you're going to be having a conversation about permanent seats on the UN Security Council. Secretary General Antonio Guterres had some stern words.
Africa's permanent representation is long overdue. It's a scandal that there is still no African permanent representative in the Security Council.
Antonio Guterres' calls add weight to the urgency, especially on the need to ensure Africa has a say in its own security matters. A highlight of the day was the Big Push panel, a high-level session which brought together the presidents of Botswana and Namibia and financial powerhouses, which brought another conversation to how Africa's resources should be processed at home in order to create jobs and cut imports.
We need to move to the core of the supply chain that the world needs for the energy it needs. And we can do that by just simply focusing on how to capture and retain more value at home and at the source of the material.
Often, the statistic of Africa's massive youth population is brought up as an example of advantage. But without education, the resources of population loses value.
It's not just the raw materials, and it's not just the young people. If you put a young person in a car that has not been trained to drive the car will smash.
What remains to be seen is how the calls for change today will transform into action. Monday's edition of Unstoppable Africa will shift its attention to look at investment and technology with a special performance from Tiwa Savage. One lesson that we have learned here is that if leaders do keep up the momentum, the foundations that they lay today will bear fruit for Africa tomorrow. Adefemi Akinsanya, Arise News, New York.
Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya, live in New York City, enjoying on our behalf, I guess. Good morning, Adefemi.
As always. Good morning, Dr. Ruben, as always, enjoying on your behalf. Good morning to you all. Good morning, Vidbhai.
Good morning, Adefemi of New York.
Good to hear your voices. Yes, so it is just before 4 a.m. It's around 3:30, 3:40 a.m. in the morning. But we're up and grateful as ever. Let me tell you what is happening around the world. Now, first things first, we do know that the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Kashim Shettima, will be leading the delegation representing President Bola Ahmed Tinubu at this year's edition of the United Nations General Assembly. The Vice President did arrive in New York on Sunday evening. Our very own Adesuwa Giwa Osage was there when he initially eventually arrived. And so we are seeing in these images him being flanked by members of the federal government. Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Yusuf Tuga, is on ground. We also know that the Honourable Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, Dr. Jumoke Oduwole, also present. The Minister of Health, Ali Pate Bosun Tijani, who had actually been in New York for quite some time, had already hosted a series of events coming into High Level Week, also on ground. We see that the leader of the Nigerians in the Diaspora Commission, Abike Dabiri Ewawa, also on ground. So quite a strong showing of support behind the Vice President as he does the work of dutifully representing the President in his absence. This is something that he did do last year as well. He will be delivering his remarks to the General Assembly come Wednesday. That's something that will happen around 8:30 p.m. local time in New York as now. And that's something that's going to translate to around 1 to 2 a.m. in the morning, Nigeria time, West Africa time. So it is going to be one to stay up for. But when we are looking ahead to what he will say, we do know that his remarks will unveil Nigeria's nationally determined contributions as part of the Paris Climate Agreement. So he will be talking about the environment. But when we're talking about the real top priorities of his presence at the United Nations General Assembly, it is very likely that the Vice President will talk about debt forgiveness. This took up the lion's share of his commentary at last year's general debate. And it's likely it will continue to be the same. We do know that domestically in Nigeria, the country's debt profile continues to make headlines, and this also has international ramifications, international consequences. So it is likely that that will be the priority again come his comments this time. In addition to debt forgiveness, we will expect that he will talk about security also. He will talk, we'd expect, about, again, 2 seats on the UN Security Council, permanent seats going to African countries, Nigeria clearly wanting to be one of them. And when we're looking at countries in the Global South being able to have a real say in the matters that concern them, this would be a great way for the United Nations to do so. So we are expecting him to also mention that. He will discuss illicit flows, corruption in his comments, and it will be something that will continue really to underscore his presence here. There is definitely going to be a scorecard of what Nigerians can expect from their representatives at the UN General Assembly. In addition to his remarks at the General Assembly, we do know that the ministers will be hosting a series of side events which will foster different types of resolutions, deals, and again, hopefully be able to deliver real tangible results back to the Nigerian people. For the Vice President himself, we do know that he will be participating in a roundtable with the Kenyan government to look at ways to create affordable housing. So that's something that many Nigerian people can look forward to. And then again, he will be talking and engaging in more bilateral meetings to do with corruption, to with drug trafficking, again, fostering better global cooperation. So there's a lot to expect from the federal government of Nigeria at their outing at this year's UNGA. Moving on now, we do know that this year's edition of UNGA marks 80 years of the United Nations presence. And in a sit-down interview with the Deputy Secretary General Amina of the United Nations, Amina Mohammed, she did tell Arise News specifically about her thoughts looking across these last 80 years and how it is that Africa and Nigeria are really participating on the world stage. Let's take a listen to what she had to say. Welcome to the 80th edition of the United Nations General Assembly right here in New York City. As High Level Week begins, Arise News sits down with the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Amina J. Mohammed. As world leaders gather for a pivotal week in diplomacy and decision-making, we'll discuss the challenges and opportunities facing global sustainable development.
And we are faced with enormous crises, geopolitical tensions, and whatever we say, people are feeling the pain and people are losing. But there's still an enormous amount of hope, because as you look back, what founded this incredible institution was the Charter, very much about we the people, very much about peace. The Declaration of Human Rights that really told us that these 5 rights are indivisible, but they're progressive.
Being in your presence, it is a source of pride for me as a Nigerian and an African. And when we look at the African continent, we see that a lot of attention is shifting on looking at Africa as a driver of global change. So when we're looking at the efforts of the organization, in which ways is the United Nations ensuring that Africa is not just responding to global economic agenda, but really being the ones shaping it?
Well, I mean, for a long while, the lens on Africa was as a recipient. But no, we're owners of this going concern called the United Nations. And we're a big part of it.
A very, very big part of it. So when we're looking at those comments, it does kind of widen the conversation to what else is happening at the UN General Assembly. Well, ahead of it starting this week and continuing to start this week, we do know that the United Kingdom, France, Australia and Portugal and Canada have all formally recognized Palestinian statehood. This is something that doesn't come as an initial huge surprise because, again, in the coming weeks leading up to this, all of these countries, bar Portugal, had talked about their intention to do so at the United Nations General Debate if certain conditions were not met. That was really a warning shot to Israel to see if that could do something to force a de-escalation of what we are seeing in Gaza. Clearly, that is something that has not happened. So they have doubled down on what they said they were going to do. And as I've said, the United Kingdom, France, Australia, Canada, and also Portugal have now formally recognized Palestinian statehood, and it is likely that when they all address the United Nations General Assembly during the general debate, they will continue and to provide more context on their decision to do so. So that is quite a significant shift in the international order as it stands now. And really speaking of Palestine and its presence here in terms of debates and these recognitions from these world leaders, we do know that we will not be seeing Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas himself. He was not granted a visa by the US government in order for him to attend the United Nations General Assembly in person. Could this be something intentional? Is this a political move? Was there an issue behind this? This is something that has definitely ruffled a lot of feathers, and that is why we have seen that within the General Assembly, a resolution was passed by a vote of 145 votes in favor, 5 against and 6 abstentions to allow President of Palestine, Mahmoud Abbas, to appear virtually. So he will be delivering his remarks via video link, and it just shows that even though he will not be here in person, he will be able to represent his country at the United Nations General Debate, especially when it is his country's matters, the conflict in the Middle East that is constituting a lot of global shifts. So we will be hearing from him, albeit virtually. And then when we are talking about the politicization, if that, of the visas coming into the United States, the Palestinian president is not alone. We do know that the Brazilian health minister has cancelled his trip to New York for the General Assembly because when he received his US visa, it came with very strict restrictions. It said that he could only be at his hotel or the United Nations headquarters. So clearly that is something that he did not want to participate in. Again, that calls questions on the motivations behind that decision to restrict his visa. We do know that, of course, a close ally of President Donald Trump in Brazil, the former president Jair Bolsonaro, was convicted of trying to plot a coup and will be likely facing a lengthy prison sentence ahead of the verdict and the subsequent sentence. We do know that members of the US federal government, of course members of the Trump administration, Trump himself had talked about how this entire process was a witch hunt. So when we're seeing the Brazilian health minister not get a free and clear visa to really enjoy coming into New York, that could be another example of the politicization of the visa process as we come over to the United Nations General Assembly. So those are really my updates on the World Brief. I don't know if you want to ask me anything before we head over to the papers. What do you think?
All right, Adefemi, so many juicy issues, but unfortunately our time is fast spent. So let's get straight into the newspaper review and find out what's happening locally.
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much. Alrighty, so let's take a look at the front page of This Day. As ever, This Day is Nigeria's newspaper of record. It does lead with former governor of Kaduna State, Nasir El-Rufai, warning that if President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is not voted out in 2027, he may try and stay in power indefinitely as president for life, as we've been seeing examples of that across Africa. One example that comes to mind is, of course, Paul Biya of Cameroon. Now, El-Rufai accused the Tinubu administration combination of centralizing power, undermining federalism, and stifling dissent and opposition. If we move on to the New Telegraph, it leads this morning with the controversy surrounding Vice Admiral UNGA80. His claims that Rivers State saved 5 billion naira while he was at the helm of Rivers State for the past 6 months. Now, this is really tied to these different job figures. He said that verification reduced the workforce to about 37,703 civil servants and 19,186 pensioners. The thing about that is, though, critics are saying that many of those removed or classified as imposters were real workers who actually might have been on leave or training. So really, this isn't the big reduction or saving of money as the Vice Admiral says it is. So we will have to keep our eyes on that. But moving on to the Punch this morning, we do know that the Punch does have this story of, again, River State matters carried again. It does focus rather on Ibag rejecting the State Assembly's move to probe his spending during his 6 months as sole administrator. The probe is to cover spending from the Consolidated Revenue Fund, contract awards and other expenditures under his administration for the past 6 months. The Assembly did note that River State received about 254.37 billion naira between March and August 2025 via FAC allocations under this sole administrator. Now, The Guardian this morning does lead with the political tensions deepening over President Tinubu's reforms. Be interesting to see whether or not that constitutes any commentary during the general debate. And also the Daily Trust reports on 53 security men unfortunately being killed over the past 2 years. The Nation newspaper has EFCC chairman recently stating that over 13,000 convictions have been secured by the EFCC in its 22 years of operation. For the year of 2020-24 alone, EFCC secured 4,111 convictions. That is the highest in any single year since its founding. Also, in 2024, they recovered about 364.4 billion naira in assets. The Vanguard this morning reports that in the first half of 2025, crude oil imports into Nigeria rose sharply by about 26.5%, and that increase is largely driven by the feedstock needs of the Dangote refinery, which has been really needing all of this crude coming into the country, all of these import crudes from countries such as the United States, Brazil, Angola, and Equatorial Guinea. Finally, if we look at the UK Guardian, just to make things a bit broader, the picture headline does show the crowd at Charlie Kirk's memorial service, which took place in Arizona over the weekend. And of course, that paper's headline is talking about Prime Minister Keir Starmer's decision to formally recognize a Palestinian statehood. Those are your papers from Nigeria to around the world.
Adefemi, I know it's just the beginning of a very busy week for you in New York. Thank you so much for those exclusive interviews, that with the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. And we look forward to plenty more coming out of New York from Adefemi Akinsanya. But for now,